Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another Learning Lunch, hosted by ForMed Approved and ForMedTraining.com. We apologize for starting a couple of minutes late, but we're eager to get to our subject today. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Online Training and Education with ForMed Training, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's Learning Lunch will cover managing communication for better patient privacy and security. We're joined today by Scott Barlow, who is Vice President of Sales and Product Management at Reflexion Networks. ForMed Approved has partnered with Reflexion Networks to offer health IT and HIPAA training, and we are thrilled that we have this opportunity to share Scott's expertise with you today. I look forward to learning more about email security and HIPAA compliance through today's presentation. If you have questions during this session, please enter them into the chat area during the presentation. In the second half of our presentation, we will address as many questions as time allows. If we do run out of time, answers to all submitted questions will be posted to our website and sent by email link later in the week. Also, as we are often asked this question during the session, please note that all registered attendees of today's session will receive an email with links to both the recorded and PDF versions of the event. All right, Scott, if you're ready to begin, what are some techniques that providers and business associates can use to comply with HIPAA regulations regarding email? Why is it an issue?
Well, first, Brian, I wanted to thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to talk and try to share some expertise that we have. Just a little bit of background. Reflexion actually offers email security, encryption, and email archiving. And more recently, we've done this to really focus on compliance, especially around, HIPAA, but also some of the regulations in, some of the other industries like financial services and, helping partners help their customers protect against the, disclosure or the wrongful disclosure of, personally identifiable information and protected health information. There's a lot of techniques out there that solution providers can use to protect their customers from, violating HIPAA. A lot of them really center around the email because email is, very complicated from, a management standpoint. It's very dynamic, and you also have, to manage not just the email security and the anti-spam, but you have to manage what is being disclosed out via plain text email. And a lot of times, end-user customers will think when they send an email from their laptop to a recipient that it's going to go from their PC or Mac to the recipient's PC. And we all know it doesn't. From a technical standpoint, it goes through a variety of routers and switches and, your corporate networks, anti-spam and DLP and all these other solutions, as well as the recipients. And so oftentimes, the end user thinks that they are sending secure email, and they're not. And email, by virtue of the SMTP protocol, is not a secure way of communicating. So what we've done, and we've worked with a lot of solution providers in the past, is really assist in implementing two additional components to the anti-spam service. The first is email encryption. And I think everybody needs to be very cautious of sending outbound email via plain text. And, that includes, a lot of different things which we'll talk about. But also from an archiving standpoint, you need to comply with a lot of the HIPAA regulations that require the archival of email. And the archival of email is a lot different than a backup solution. You're not essentially taking a snapshot of the email server and calling that a compliant archive. You need something that is an active email archive that can really coexist with any messaging platform. I know that a lot of partners will have customers that have hosted Exchange, that have on-premises Exchange. They might have GroupWise or Domino or Google Apps. And so you want to be able to figure out a solution that can cater to all of these diverse customer environments. And so putting, email security together with email archiving and email encryption is really, a very common and, best practice technique to helping end-user customers comply with the HIPAA regulations, because you're not going to be encrypting, or you're not going to be archiving encrypted email, or you're not going to be sending out, personally identifiable information or protected health information via plain text. So there's a lot of components that go into that. You also need disk encryption. You need data, backup, disaster recovery and business continuity solutions. But you also need to make sure that you're, anybody that has visibility into health information needs to be, trained on what it means to, protect that information. And, we've read numerous stories over the years, and a lot of stories this year are very small physician practices. There was a 2-physician practice in Massachusetts. I think it was a subsidiary of Mass Pioneer that had 2 physicians, and they had a breach, and it was very few documents that were disclosed, and they ended up getting fined $500,000. And something similar just happened in Idaho. So, it's not isolated to a specific region. It is a national issue. That all solution providers and anybody on the call need to be very concerned about.
So let's get down to brass tacks. What kinds of information should not be sent via unsecure email?
Well, you see on the slide that there are several pieces of information here. You have things like Social Security numbers, personally identifiable information, protected health information, tax records, driver's license number, credit card numbers, and so forth. But what happens typically is, an end user will not really understand what is, personally identifiable or protected health information, and they will take a risk. And we all do it. We all take risks. Somebody says, hey, what's your credit card number? I needed to, book a room at this hotel, or I need to, I need to pay a deductible for a health update or a checkup. But it extends way beyond, just the traditional, sensitive documents. You have other things like certificate of title. You have loan application. I mentioned the tax records in here. In Massachusetts, I'm from Massachusetts, if you haven't figured that out. And in our tax returns, we have to submit a health insurance form in order to, get our taxes, submitted correctly. Also credit reports and, taxpayer ID numbers. And so it goes way beyond, just protected health information. When we're looking at HIPAA in general, or a HIPAA violation, it doesn't include, it doesn't focus primarily on health terms or health identifiers. You need to have both in an email. So if my doctor sends me an email and it says, Scott Barlow, patient ID, diagnosis, that is a violation of HIPAA. If I send my wife an email that says, I have a headache and I include my signature, that does not include any health identifiers. And so when you have the health identifiers coupled with the health terms, that is where you need to be concerned about a violation in, in HIPAA, in the HIPAA regulations. Beyond that, we also, each of the 46 out of the 50 U.S. states actually have their own data breach notification law. Alabama, Kentucky, New Mexico, and South Dakota are the 4 states that do not. And so the state-level regulations can also trump the federal regulation. For instance, if there is a breach of HIPAA, traditionally you have to report that within 60 days. In California specifically, California has reduced that 60-day period down to 5 days. So if there's a laptop that gets stolen, you need to report that to the media in order to communicate that out to the patients that had a potential violation. Same thing in Massachusetts. Massachusetts' privacy policy extends outside of Massachusetts. It's one of the only state data breach notification laws that extend out. So if I go to the local CVS here, I'm in Miami right now, and I get, whatever, the Minute Clinic, and they send, even just my driver's license number out via plain text email, that Florida company just violated the Massachusetts privacy law. So when you're dealing with HIPAA, there's also a lot of these other state regulations that extend the enforcement of HIPAA down to the state level. So solution providers, when talking to their customers, if it's mostly in healthcare or even if you have customers in other verticals, you need to, really educate yourself on, what the compliance regulations are out there in the industry, because a lot of times an end user will perhaps send a file that contains, protected health information to their home email address. And they do that not because they're malicious, but because that employee is trying to do the same amount of work with the same amount of resources. And when that happens, they're just trying to do good, but they're creating, a violation in a lot of the healthcare laws. So from an end user standpoint, when I want to send something that contains sensitive information, a lot of companies say, don't do that. But now what you're doing is you're relying on the end user to be good. So what you need to do is train the employees on the proper use of email and, and the transmission of the sensitive data. But if you do want to send out sensitive documents, there's a variety of other techniques that, you can use, like a fax machine. I think some companies still have those. You can actually send it in the mail as well. You can send it, you can password protect a zip file and then send that zip file and then send the password in another email. But it's a huge challenge because email is still the preferred method of communication. So, it's a tremendous opportunity for solution providers, even for end user customers, to enhance, business communication by protecting all of the sensitive information that we have up on the slide right now.
So how can people implement secure email, and is it okay to send email that contains PHI if it is secure?
Yes. So, there's a variety of different solutions out there that you can, that anybody can implement at an organization. There's, I guess, multiple levels of communication. You have some small doctors that say, I don't use email, but they'll open up their Gmail account on their, personal work computer, and then they'll email, things like X-rays or MRI results, things like that. There's a variety of techniques that people can use. A lot of times you can have an Outlook plugin that, you could say send securely. The way that we do it is actually 100% in the cloud. There's no software or hardware to install or maintain. So you'll have that secure TLS connection, which will secure the pipe over which the plain text email is transmitted. And then once it hits our data centers, we'll scan the content of the subject, the body, and the attachment. And what that will do is, so you basically apply what we call a predefined subject matter lexicon. And that will essentially scan the content and determine if there are, health terms and health identifiers. If there are not, then we will send it via plain text email because there is no violation. If it does violate that HIPAA lexicon, what we will do is we will encrypt the email. We'll actually look to see if the recipient of the message is using the system. There's about 35 million users that are on the system today. And if they are using it, then we'll just use their public key and send it to their implementation. If they're not, we will see if there's a way that we can establish that secure TLS connection to the receiving server. If we can, we'll just send it over a secure pipe. If not, what happens is a notification will go down to the end user recipient saying that they have a secure message that, this is the subject line, it's from the sender, click a link to log in and decrypt decrypt the message. So it's a one-time registration process. And a lot of times it's important because you need to ensure that the customer is protected, because at the end of the day, if you're providing, if you're a solution provider and you're providing, an all-you-can-eat agreement or a managed services agreement in place, and you say, I'll take care of all of your IT needs, and in their healthcare, and you're not doing encryption, we've seen a lot of partners and even customers get in trouble because they say that they're doing it, but they're actually not. And when you're dealing with some of the big guys like Google or Microsoft, they do, they have services to encrypt email and so forth, but they will not respond to a HIPAA audit on behalf of your customers. And so you just have to be careful when you're talking to the vendor that whoever you're talking to will respond and will put their name on the line to, say that they are a compliant email service.
So just to be clear, if someone is using Gmail, let's say, and they get investigated for a breach, Gmail basically washes their hands of the whole matter. They don't consider themselves part of the equation. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it's the end user's responsibility. And it's not just Gmail. If you have your email hosted, if you have your business email hosted on, say, Google Apps, they won't, and they have an archive and they have an encryption solution and so forth, but they will not say that it is HIPAA compliant. They won't say it's FINRA or SEC compliant. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of opportunity. This is kind of where the solution provider comes in to transition from being that trusted IT advisor, which is probably one of the most overused terms in the industry today, to becoming more of a compliance advisor or a chief security officer, where they can now add even more value to the customer. And it's a huge differentiation opportunity as well, because a lot of these solution providers out there, they don't want anything to do with, doctor offices or the healthcare vertical, just because they're not prepared and they don't have the education to, to advise an end user customer on things that are this important.
So how does encryption work? And you mentioned this before. I wanted to follow up about the lexicons. So are you saying that this is an automatic process that scans the email for PHI? How does that work?
Yeah, so basically, as the email goes through the policy-based encryption engine, you can apply a variety of different mechanisms to scan the contents of the email automatically and transparently. The end user also has the opportunity to, insert a keyword in the subject line. They can mark a message confidential in Outlook, and that will force encryption. But a lot of times, relying on the end user who has so much other responsibility, relying on them to remember to do that is, often not a good thing. So it's a predefined subject matter lexicon that will automatically scan the content of the message to ensure that, if it needs to get encrypted, that it has protected, it has the help terms and the health identifiers in the body or the subject or any attachments. It also will scan attachments. The best part about this is if there's communication between two customers on the encryption solution, they will communicate via an encrypted format or via secure end-to-end encryption service without any notification, without any requirement to do any decryption. So there's a pretty significant opportunity for partners to determine, hey, my customer communicates with hospital.com, for instance, and if that hospital.com, if my customer sends a lot of email to them, then I am going to implement this encryption solution so that all of the email that we transmit, all of it, regardless of what's in the content, will be encrypted. And then that way you will be able to, ensure that you're HIPAA compliant. But from an end user standpoint, there is no additional learning that is required or end user change in behavior, because everything is just going to come in a secure fashion.
And the forced keywords, is that what you were talking about, that certain terms will automatically shift the email into encryption?
Yeah, so you can put things like secure or encrypt this or so forth in the subject line, and that will force encryption. It's also important to note, I think, just our experience, solution providers don't focus 100% on the healthcare vertical. You'll have some other customers that do business maybe in financial services, or you might have some banks or broker dealers, and there are a variety of different lexicons that can apply to the outgoing email. Others include financial services, and then we have several state data breach laws like Massachusetts, California, Washington, Nevada. All of those will also apply to the other states. So if you're in a state that has a data breach notification law, it's highly recommended you learn what that law is. Just search, your state. Like I could search Florida data breach law, and it would come up with a 2 to 3 page guideline on how to protect Florida residents' information. If you want to read a really comprehensive one, look at the Massachusetts privacy law, CMR 17 or 201 CMR 17. And what that will do is, allow you to apply a predefined lexicon to ensure that the outgoing email doesn't contain any of these violations, not just in HIPAA, but extending that to residents' information like credit cards and social security numbers and so forth. The other lexicon that we have that is pretty popular with our customers is profanity. And I'm not going to share the contents of the profanity lexicon. We've looked at it a little bit, and it's pretty comprehensive. I even learned some things looking at it. But I think that if you're a business and you're communicating at a very high level, the last thing you want to do is have your employees sending out profanity via email. And so instead of encrypting the email and sending it to the end user recipient, what you can do is you can apply the profanity lexicon, and instead of encrypting it, you can bounce it back to the administrator, the owner, or the user, saying that this type of language is not permitted in our corporate network. And so now you can also implement an email acceptable use policy, as I'm sure you have a web acceptable use policy and all these other AUPs that just will ensure that your business reputation isn't going to be tainted by anything that your end user is sending out via plain text email.
And just to be clear on terminology, a lexicon is essentially, tell me if I've got this right, it's basically a database of terminology and relevant terms that will pop up then in that search of the email. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's basically just a fancy word for a dictionary, and in the dictionary it will include expressions. So to give you an example, if you have 3 zeros, 2 zeros, and then 4 zeros, that isn't representative of a valid Social Security number. So we have a lot of people testing the system, and they'll send that out, and that doesn't work. It's invalid. If you have a correct structure where it starts with the right 3 characters or 3 numbers, it has 2 numbers in the middle separated by a dash, and then 4 numbers at the end, it will look at that expression as opposed to kind of going through and looking at every possible iteration of a 9-digit number. So there's a lot of calculation that goes on in the background. Same thing with health terms. I mean, you have so many health terms that end in oscopy or end in just a variety of other Latin-based suffixes or prefixes. So it's a very intelligent lexicon that will be applied to ensure that what needs to get encrypted does, and what doesn't need to get encrypted does not, because there'll be a lot of false positives if you said I want to encrypt any 9-digit number.
Well, you've touched on this already, but let's get more into why it's important to encrypt email.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously you comply with regulations, but there's more to it than that. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we see, you know, our partners implementing encryption for, and you know, there's technical justification, but also a lot of business justification for email encryption. You know, the reputational risk, you know, and so you have the compliance, the regulatory compliance pressures both on a state and a federal level. You know, the data breach laws, HIPAA, high tech, you know, FINRA, et cetera. But from a business standpoint, kind of getting down to brass tacks, you know, if you have a breach, you know, first, it's going to be a huge hit to your reputation. It's also going to be very, very costly. You know, we've seen fines levied between $500,000 and, you know, several $1 million. And, you know, as you're reading all of these articles about companies that go through a security breach, you see that 60% of all businesses that encounter a breach go out of business within 6 months. And, you know, I've read 70% go out of business in 7 months. And, you know, give it some time and you'll have, you know, 100% going out of business in 10 months. But, you know, there's a lot of, when you're talking to customers, there's kind of this sales rationale where does the customer respond better to pain or gain? And if they respond better to pain, they need to understand, you know, what solutions out there or what other breaches have been out there that may have been in their region, that may have been in their vertical. And there's a lot of really good websites that offer some of this information. I'm chair of the IT security community for CompTIA, and we're putting together a real-world data breach database that everybody can look at. It's up on the CompTIA website. There's another website called datalossdb.org, and it's DATALOSS, D as in dog, B as in boy.org. You know, so besides the cost and the reputation, there's also the opportunity to immediately deliver confidential documents to partners and customers. You can eliminate a lot of the costs related to manually sending confidential documents. We've also heard that companies have been implementing, you know, email encryption to go green and reduce the amount of paper used in the daily operation. You know, and from a solution provider standpoint, you're also, you know, adding additional services into your customer so that, you know, they're not going to go out and learn it on their own and then go and, you know, put out an RFP. It's included within your profile or your menu of offerings. One other point that I wanted to make, because we see the inbound and outbound email of almost 12,000 customers, we have subscribed to an AOL feedback loop. And essentially what that does is if I send an email today to an AOL user, and that AOL user says, this is spam, what happens is we get a copy of that message so that we can analyze it and, you know, adjust our filters in order to prevent outgoing spam messages from being proliferated from our IP addresses. And oftentimes, or I would say 99 or 98% of the time, every feedback report that we get is a legitimate email, and it's just an end user not knowing that there's a delete button versus a, you know, this is spam button. And as we get these, I mean, we have to analyze them. And, you know, recently I looked at a message that was reported as spam, and I don't know if it was because of the results or whatnot, but it was one of our medical customers that sent a mammogram that included the diagnosis, it included the Social Security number, the patient number, it included the patient name. It was an oncology customer. And they sent this email with the mammogram via plain text email. And it floored me. It was shocking. And, you know, if I am that patient on the other end, I would be furious. But it's, you know, it's a situation where, yes, that person should not have clicked this is spam because it wasn't spam, it was a legitimate email. But on the flip side, that doctor should not have been communicating with that, you know, that physician practice should not have been communicating with that type of information via email. It floored me. And so, we reached out to the partner, and then they have, they subsequently implemented encryption. But there's so much out there that, if you send an email, just assume it's going to be public on the internet. And that's, what I do. I'm not going to send anything out via email that I don't want the internet to be able to read. And so, I've picked up the phone, more often over the past couple of years as I've learned more about these, privacy regulations and HIPAA and some of the other, state and local requirements.
You mentioned before the increased reporting on data breaches, and I'm sure many of our attendees may know this already, but I also wanted to mention that the Office for Civil Rights with HHS publishes any breach of over 500 records on their wall of shame. So from the HIPAA perspective, if a breach of any size, significant size, is going to be publicized on the web. So let's
and it's a requirement now too.
I was just going to say, what is a compliant archive? How does that fit into the overall security picture?
Yeah, so from an archiving standpoint, email archiving actually goes way beyond the requirements for HIPAA. Any company that can get sued in civil court needs to comply with what is called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which requires or which changed what is discoverable in court. And now any electronically stored information, or ESI, can be discoverable in court. So you have a backup solution, which I was talking about earlier. And a backup solution is a snapshot of a mail server or of a PC or something at a point in time, where a compliant archive will grow over time, and you're not going to delete anything that is, that wasn't included last week. You're not going to have a 7-day rolling backup that will, delete the one that was 8 days old. A compliant archive requires the ability to store email in a non-editable and non-deletable format. I can go into Outlook and I can change the content of any email that I choose. So if I wanted to, hurt somebody, I could go in and I could say that they sent me an email, and I could change all of the content, print it out, and say, here, this is the email that they sent me, when the content that I just changed is not, was not sent to me. It was edited by me. So when you get into the compliant archive, it is an archiving solution that does not allow end users to edit or delete or modify the content in any way whatsoever. And here you'll see users do not have the ability to manipulate the archive. And it's important because, you can maintain a copy of the archive for 7 years and delete anything older than 7 years. Or you can, implement your own retention policy in there. If you wanted to delete anything older than 3 years, you could also do that. But at the end of the day, it's just a best practice, and it can be used for so many things way beyond, compliance. You can use it for email continuity. So if the mail server goes down, you can log in and send and receive email. You can use it to recover individual messages. I don't know how many times we hear in a week, that an end user deleted a message, and the message they deleted was sent by somebody that went on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks. Well, you can log into the compliant archive and click a link and recover an individual message back down to the user's inbox, or you can download multiple. You can download an inbox. You can forward messages. You can reply to email. You can generate new email. So it goes way beyond just being a compliant archive. And I think it's important to kind of maintain that distinction where you have the archive and you have the discovery, you have the recovery, you have the continuity. And so now you're not just saying, yeah, I'm going to implement this solution that's out there. You may not know it's out there. You may not see the value in me implementing this solution. And now you're actually bringing that back in and saying, oh, yeah, I can recover that from the archives. Or, your mail server crashed, or you had a natural disaster. You had a massive hurricane come through the Northeast. We were spooling email for 1,200 customers that were using the archive to send and receive email to, maintain their business productivity. So it's important to have the compliant archive where you can't edit or manipulate the email in any way, but also extending that way beyond, compliance into, something that is more digestible by an end user business. because archiving is, it's like insurance. You don't need it until you need it. And when you need it and it's not there, you have a major issue.
We're waiting to answer questions until the end, but I think this is along the lines of what you were just saying, is someone was asking what kinds of operations should have a compliant archive. And it sounds like you're saying most businesses should be using this sort of technology. How would you address that?
Yeah, so the U.S. government actually changed the laws. It was called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, and it's the FRCPs. And the FRCPs required any company that can get sued in civil court to produce electronically stored information in what they call a timely manner. If you're looking at, if your company can get sued in civil court, have an archive. That's kind of an open-ended statement because virtually every organization in every industry can get sued in civil court. But you have to just think about it from a management or a data management strategy, looking at the ability to archive and maintain electronically stored information. You also have FINRA, and FINRA applies to brokers, dealers. So every stock quote and things like goodbye and deal, you need to be able to search that content and report on it. So if you have a chief security officer or a compliance officer within an organization, you need to be able to allow that person to search the archive, and you can't really do that with Exchange. Most companies don't have those people on their staff, and so they turn to solution providers to do that. And a lot of our solution providers have become experts in compliance. But I would definitely take a look at the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, and the archive would be used during the discovery phase of a lawsuit, which is basically the pretrial phase in which each party will share the requested documents and other evidence, or that is subpoenaed through other discovery devices for depositions and so forth. But this change was made in 2006, and a lot of people that I talk to say, I have a 10-user business. I don't really need to worry about that. You do. And it's coming down to the small and mid-sized business more and more every single day. There was a couple of recent articles that I read. One was where Best Buy sued their leasing company, Developers Diversified Realty Corp. And Developers Diversified said they didn't have the resources to find all of the required materials, and the court ordered them to produce all material from 345 backup tapes, and they gave them 29 days to do it. And I think the cost was somewhere around $500,000, and that didn't include the attorney fees. And regardless of the size of the company, I've read multiple articles. I think there's an electronic discovery. If you go to electronicdiscoveryblog.com, there are hundreds of examples where people said, I don't have the resources to produce that information. And the court, will basically give you 30 days to produce all pertinent information. And I have people also asking me on the other side, well, what if I have a 30-day email retention policy? Anything older than 30 days I'm going to delete. Well, that's great, because if you get sued, if that customer gets sued in civil court and the other, other party in the lawsuit can produce all of this information going back 7 years and you only have 30 days, what does that make you look like, or what does the customer look like? Are they hiding something? Do they just not care? So there's a lot of other less tangible, reasons why you need to archive email. I hope that helps answer the question. If not, please, please ask follow-up.
No, it does. It does. Let's talk about business associate agreements. That's obviously specific to HIPAA, but who needs to sign a business associate agreement, and where can people get templates for that sort of thing?
Yeah, so anybody, so any covered entity or anybody that's doing business business with a covered entity needs to have a business associate agreement in place. So if you're a solution provider and you and your techs have access to your healthcare customers' protected health information, you need to have a business associate agreement in place with that customer. We often see solution provider stories where you go on site, you take a laptop off site, that laptop is put in the trunk, the laptop gets stolen, the disk is not encrypted, that's a breach. If you don't have a business associate agreement in place, you're screwed basically. So you need to be covered. So HIPAA extends to the business associates as well as the covered entities. There is a business associate agreement template that can be downloaded as part of the HIPAA the HIPAA security training as well as the HIT training, and I think that we have a link to that coming up. But the recent changes as well, the omnibus implementation that went in place March 28th, and that is going to go in effect, I think it's September 30th, is extending that. So, we're doing a lot of research around how far down the line do business associate agreements go and who needs to apply it to who. We recently encountered a situation where this was not a healthcare entity, but we encountered a situation where a solution provider in the Midwest had an all-you-can-eat agreement in place with the end-user customer. And they had, so we have two versions of our archive. One is the compliant archive, full-blown, unlimited history, unlimited storage, all that stuff. And then we have a second that's a 60-day rolling archive, just for the purpose of email continuity. And so the all-you-can eat agreements that they had in place that will cover all of your IT needs. Well, that customer got sued. And when they said, you need to produce all your electronically stored information over the last 7 years that's pertinent to this case, and they said, we can't because we don't have a compliant archive, the customer that was suing our partner's customer went after the partner because the agreement said it covered everything, and it did not. So there's a lot of issues when you're dealing with, all-you-can-eat agreements and so forth, and you just need to be very, clear with the customer. And that was, I think it was a manufacturing organization. So, regardless of the vertical, archiving, I think, should play a very important and pertinent role in the data management strategy.
And maybe you could say more. My understanding is that the omnibus rule also has made it clear that even organizations that maintain data are business associates. So even if they don't ordinarily access it, if they come into contact with it, if they need to do maintenance of an archive or something of that nature, that they could also be considered business associates under the omnibus rule. Could you say a little bit about that?
No, yes, that's entirely correct. And so we're looking at these laws as well very closely. We have a business associate agreement that we put in place with the partner, and the partner with the customer, and we need to see how far down the line it goes. So you have the customer to the partner to us as a vendor, but then does it extend to our data center providers, because we outsource we have a co-location that a partner implements. It's a data center provider, but then the data center itself that houses the servers that the data center provider, has our servers and racks. So how far down the line does it go? I think it's important, what we're doing is we're analyzing, we don't have access to any of the data, but we have the data. Everything is encrypted using 256 AES-bit encryption, 256-bit AES encryption. So we don't have access to the data unless you give us the password. If you give us the password, now we have access to the data. Do we need to be, do we need to have a business associate agreement in place? And I think the answer is yes. So, we're going to be modifying our agreement, and I think that anybody that is out of compliance with that law needs to get into compliance by September 30th, as far as I understand. But if a solution provider, like I said earlier, if you're carrying a disk that has protected health information on it and it's not encrypted, and it gets stolen, you need to report that breach. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of different scenarios, and I'm sure that everybody on the call right now, their wheels are turning because, if you have a tech that has access to an Exchange server that has protected health information on it, that's you need to have that business associate agreement in place.
And the thing that's really struck me about what you said today is the regulatory complexity, that it's not just complying with HIPAA, it's complying with a web of regulations, and sorting out that regulatory complexity isn't always easy.
It's not at all. And one of the reasons, and I think that you can switch to the next slide. We'll transition to questions and answers. But one of the reasons why we implemented and started offering the HIPAA training is that we often had solution providers contact us and say, "Are you HIPAA compliant?" And it struck me that that's such a wrong question to ask. The right question is, do your services allow me to wrap people and processes around them in order to help achieve compliance? And, so we started offering the HIPAA training and certification because, I thought it was important to help partners get a better understanding of what it all means and how it all works together. And what I liked most about the training was, yes, it teaches you about HIPAA and all the regulations that kind of, that evolve around it. But it also, more importantly, takes into account some of the external factors and the external regulatory compliance, factors like the state data breach laws. And, looking at California, you don't have 60 days. You have 5 days, to report a breach. So, looking at it from more of a holistic standpoint, because I need to file my taxes with my copy of, health coverage with my taxes, now you're getting into accounting organizations that need to comply with HIPAA because they have protected health information. They'll have my patient name, my doctor, my patient ID, all that good stuff. So, it extends way beyond, the healthcare vertical into so many other industries.
Well, we're running a little short of time. I want to make sure we have enough time to get to questions. First of all, I'd like to remind all of our attendees that we will provide written answers to the questions. We'll also be following up with an email that will contain a link to both the PDF of the slides and the live presentation, well, to be recorded then. But let's get to some questions while we still have some time. First, Scott, could you answer this one for me? Is there a way to block an email altogether that contains PHI rather than encrypt it?
Yes. Yeah, it's done in the same fashion as profanity. So instead, and this is a great way to present it to your customers, because when you talk to the customer's going to say, you know what, I don't send out personally identifiable information. That's great. So what happens is implement the email encryption, apply the HIPAA lexicon, and instead of encrypting it and sending it to the end user recipient, block it and then bounce it back to the guy that just said we don't send out, protected health information. So it's great for like a quick 7-day eval to show that there is, PHI being sent out via plain text email. But on any of the policies, they're very highly configurable. We have a lot of different ways that we can, bypass things like, if you're using Autotask, the Autotask ticket structure violates the Massachusetts privacy law. I'm sorry, yeah, because of the driver's license number. So it's a letter and then nine digits. So we have bypasses for that. So there's a variety of different configurations and techniques that we can use to override or to handle encrypted email however you see fit or however you'd like.
All right, well, here's a question about, I guess this is a question really about patient consent. It says, according to the new HIPAA omnibus rule, we can and have to email PHI if the patient is informed that the email is unencrypted and still chooses to have the email sent. Maybe you could address that issue. So basically the patient saying, I know it's not secure email, but I want you to send it to me over Gmail or whatever. go ahead and do it, and you tell them, well, it's not secure, and they still insist on doing it. What would you say to that?
Was that a statement or a question? Because I haven't heard that before, and if it was a statement, I'll have to believe it. But I think that any practice, I think it's just a very poor practice, because then that user takes it and can forward it somewhere, and then, I think it's the doctor's responsibility or the healthcare, practices responsibility to not disclose anything via plain text email. I've gone to, a variety of different accountants in my life, and healthcare, practices, and I don't care. Send me the email via plain text. I've often thought about situations where I would send somebody my credit card number, and it's not a breach because I'm the one that's sending it out. But if it's a doctor that's sending it to an end user recipient, that could be a breach, because if that user then gets it and then they click this is spam and we get the feedback loop, now it's not just going to that end user. And that end user, I would be cautious, because now you're relying on the end user to take that information and protect it, even though it's their own. And if that information gets out, I think it's going to be a huge issue. Even if I communicate with my doctor and say, yeah, just send it to my email address at work, and I'm an end user, I don't know that we are archiving email. Now that information is in the archive, and there are people within our company that have administrative access to that archive that could see that information. And that end user wouldn't know that. So I would highly advise against that. I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer, and certainly not a healthcare legal expert. But that's something I would have to do some research on, and maybe we can follow up on that question.
Here's an interesting one too, and it sort of goes to what you were saying about who else is going to see the information. So the question is, I send dictated chart notes, including diagnoses, over email to my transcriptionists. Now, if I only use the patient's last name and appointment time and date to identify the patient, can I send this unsecure, or should it be encrypted? Now, my first take on that is that much information already makes it PHI because it's identifiable. But maybe you could say more about how that should be handled.
Well, so I don't think there's any health terms in there. So, an appointment, a name, and a date, that's only health identifiers. And at least our HIPAA lexicon would require to have both health terms and health identifiers.
Well, the first part of the question, they mentioned that there's dictated chart notes. So that's the thing I'm thinking would trip up the lexicon.
Right. So yeah. So if in the chart notes it includes the health terms, then yes, that would need to be encrypted.
Someone wants to know what you think of Office 365 encryption and archiving.
That's a loaded question right there. I think that, so we've seen a lot of customers go up to Office 365. We've also seen a lot of customers come back down to an on-premises Exchange server. Solution providers that you might work with lose a lot of control. So if you have, a particular scenario where, you need to run a script or maintain a mailbox or run maintenance or something, you can't do that. You have to kind of rely on Microsoft to do that. Microsoft licenses a company called Voltage, and Microsoft holds the keys to the encrypted email. And so a lot of people are okay with that. A lot of people get frightened to death by that. Microsoft has also had a lot of issues as far as Office 365 reliability goes, not on a global scale, but more on a mailbox level. They might have a mailbox store go offline and they can't rebuild it, and that one mailbox, gets lost. And so unless you have a backup of that outside of Microsoft, then you're going to run into some issues. So my my comment on that would be, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. You want to, I mean, it's the same reason why you would implement a cloud service, to have kind of the, the resiliency to something that is on premises. What you'd want to do is you want to have the cloud level redundancy, so that you might have your email hosted in the cloud. You could also have your email security. You could also have your email archiving. You could also have your email encryption hosted at another provider, and that way you have that cloud level redundancy, as opposed to putting everything that you have into one cloud service.
Well, Scott, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but as I said before, we're going to assemble all of the audience questions. There's a number of questions we didn't have time to get to, unfortunately, but we're going to provide written answers to those questions and send a link out later in the week that will give you access to those answers. So we will answer your questions even though we ran out of time. I'd like to thank you, Scott, very much for joining us for today's Learning Lunch. It was very informative, and I know I learned quite a bit about encryption and complying with regulations. I would also like to thank all of our attendees today. Again, all registered attendees will receive an email with links to both recorded and PDF versions of this session. Remember to visit www.formetapproved.com/education/reflection to register for the Certified HIPAA Security course, which is designed to meet the HIPAA training needs of business associates, designated security officers, and medical staff managers. Be sure to join us at Format Approved for our next Learning Lunch, which will air tomorrow and covers the subject of best practices for hiring for EHR and HIT roles in healthcare. Keep an eye on your email box on our homepage for other upcoming topics. Thank you again for joining us today, and thank you, Scott.
Thank you for having me.